Hello everyone, thank you for joining our webinar. We're going to start in 2 minutes. All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Michael Loban and we are ready to get started. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. My name is Michael Loban and I'm CMO of InfoTrust, a digital analytics consulting and technology company. And I'm joined today by Peter Fader to discuss a wonderful topic of customer lifetime value. I've been interested in doing this webinar with Peter for a very extensive period of time, as I've noticed that many organizations often struggle with understanding of what types of customers to focus on, what types of customers have the capacity to become the most profitable, and where to focus your advertising efforts and marketing spend. And so today in this webinar, we're going to address many of these items. Just a few housekeeping items. Peter and I are actually in different locations right now. So I will be progressing through the slides, but from time to time you might hear next or let's go one step back, and I apologize for that. That simply means that I'm too eager to move to the next slide. Please post any questions in a question panel. I believe we already had one question. If the slides will be shared, slides absolutely will be shared. We'll send them to all attendees. This webinar is also being recorded, so we will be publishing the recorded version of this webinar online. Let's get started. So I would like to formally introduce Peter. Peter is an international authority on customer centricity and CLV analysis. He is a professor of marketing at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. His expertise centers around the analysis of behavioral data to understand and forecast customer shopping and purchasing activities. His work has been published in a number of leading marketing and management journals. He has won many awards for his teaching and research accomplishments. And Peter is co-founder of Zodiac Metrics.
Peter? Thank you, Michael. Great to have everyone interested in this topic. It's been for years not just developing the models, but trying to create that kind of interest. So eager to have this conversation with you and then to have lots of questions and comments from the folks who are listening.
Excellent. You can see our Twitter handles. So feel free to tweet and share content about the webinar. And again, please post questions in the question panel, and we will have a section at the end of the presentation, at the end of the webinar, to answer questions, and we'll also try to address them as we proceed. So agenda today. First, we'll talk about what are some of the common marketing metrics today, and maybe what are some of the pitfalls of those marketing metrics. Then we would like to propose some alternative metrics to consider and why they're important. The next step, once Pete shares with us how to go through the process of calculating customer lifetime value, is what do we actually do with this information and how do we optimize our marketing efforts and practices. Then I will take you through a real-life example of how we take data from our database about our customer lifetime value, how we put it in digital analytics platforms such as Google Analytics, and then how we can use this information in AdWords to optimize our marketing campaigns and targeting customers that are most profitable, have the capacity to become the most profitable, or potentially creating a negative list and not targeting people that are not the most beneficial for our business. Then we will share a couple of case studies and examples, and then we'll have Q&A. At the end of this webinar, we will also announce our next webinar, which I'm very excited about, but I will get to that. So what are some of the common marketing metrics today? This is probably among the lines of a common marketing dashboard that many of us have to work with or many of us have seen in the past. And there are many things that are right with this type of dashboard. We are looking at different metrics such as bounce rate, page views, new sessions, time on the website. We even are looking at the conversion funnel. But one of the things that you will notice is many of these metrics are very much transactional. They're about what's taking place on our website right now. Very often, these types of dashboards do not focus on forecasting or trying to determine what can happen over the next week, over the next month. This type of dashboard is very much a look in the past. Right, here's what happened over the past 30 days, over the past day, or whatever the time period might be. And very often these types of dashboards focus on averages. Right? They try to group kind of everyone into one average and saying this is what the time on site is for your average customer or for everyone that comes to your site. Very often these types of dashboards, they do not break down your customers into different segments based on types of customer, based on how much those customers have spent with your organization and how much they can be spending with your organization over the next couple of years. Generally speaking, when we look at common metrics and KPIs, it looks something like a marketing funnel. So first, we focus on how do we get people to our website or to our mobile application or maybe our Facebook page. So we focus on things like click-through rate. We look at things like viewability, how many people were exposed to our advertisements, how many people clicked on our ads. Then when we get people to our digital properties, and again, it can be a website or it can be a mobile site or mobile application, we start to focus on engagement. We try to determine number of visits, visitors to our website. We look at engagement metrics such as bounce rate. And then many of us end up looking at the conversion rates. And conversion rate is not just important to measure in terms of helping us understand how a campaign is performing in actually generating revenue, but it's a wonderful metric to look at to help us build hypotheses for what we should be testing and what we should be optimizing. However, although these metrics and KPIs are very powerful, and we certainly recommend that if you are not using them, that you should, all of the above are still focusing on short-term success. Even really measuring conversion rate means looking at success at one-time interaction. Here is the person, they came to the website, they converted, hence this is how much money I was able to generate, and this is my ROI for that specific transaction.
So the issues that Michael raised are right on target. So he raised two explicit concerns, but implicitly raised a third. The explicit ones were metrics that only look at averages and metrics that are focused on the past. And he raised conversion rate as something that's better, But then he brings up a third criterion, which is that it's not relationship oriented, that a lot of these metrics are just reflecting different activities that are just going on, just different kinds of things that you can measure operationally, but they don't reflect the nature of the relationship. And in some cases, the metrics that you'll look at not only don't reflect the nature of the relationship, but they might even steer you in the wrong direction. And I think a really great example of this would be cost per acquisition. Again, it's a very common metric, regardless of whether you're calling it CPA, CPC, CPM, just the whole idea that we're going to judge the quality of our customer relationships based on the cost of acquiring those customers. I laugh as I say that because it's so ridiculous. And it's really scary that so many companies gauge and guide the success of their customer acquisition activities on a metric like that. Again, not only because it's an average and because it's past oriented, but because it doesn't reflect the entire relationship. So you see this rhetorical question in front of you over here, and I hope you can see the main point, that when we're looking to hire employees or lawyers or technologists, we're doing so not only because of kind of one-shot goodness, but because of ongoing relationships, because of trust, and because of repeatability. So why don't we look at our customers the same way? So not only should we be using a forward-looking metric, but we should be using one that really gauges the relationship, calling it on this slide value per acquisition, but I hope you can see that that's just customer lifetime value. So we're really trying to steer the conversation about what metrics companies are using, and maybe more importantly, the criteria that they're employing as they choose and work with those metrics.
And to do that, as we look at long-term fuel planning, we need to consider that customer behavior is very much dynamic. It's full of different micro-conversions, and Luth Research published this interesting example of where one car buyer had 900 digital interactions before they made the purchase. So perhaps this is not very common, and maybe this buyer was just a little bit too undecisive. But I think it gives us a good idea that over a customer journey, there are many different micro moments or micro conversions that need to happen that we need to plan for. Obviously, customers engage with our brands, engage with our businesses across a multitude of different devices. I believe on average, each person has at least 3 or 4 different devices, such as a cell phone, such as a work laptop, can be a personal laptop, it can be an iPad, and it's a growing pain for advertisers for how do we connect digital interactions across these different devices and then across these different channels. Right? When people begin searching for the product on Google, then they go and they look at the product on Amazon to compare prices, or they look at Facebook to see if any of their friends would approve of their purchase. So many of these things we need to begin considering. So as we've discussed, in terms of long-term success, really we need to focus on real success, not just the first conversion or the first type of sale. Not to mention that a lot of times organization would overspend to generate, to bring a new customer or to generate the first conversion, just so they can then build a relationship with that customer over a longer or extended period of time. And most importantly, if we are able to identify who our most profitable customer segments are, then it allows us to better do attribution modeling and better determine where can we actually invest our advertising marketing dollars. And I just had to add this quote from Avinash Kaushik, who is probably one of the best-known authors on digital analytics. He wrote a number of different books, Web Analytics 2.0, Web Analytics an Hour a Day. And in Avinash's spirit, he shared this funny little quote on his blog about his love for people or for marketers that actually focus on lifetime customer value. And hopefully after this webinar and after Pete covers his next 2 sections, you'll be able to do this as well. So with that, let's talk about some alternative metrics to consider.
And in particular, let's jump right into customer lifetime value. You know, it's great to see those words from Avinash. I have tremendous respect for him, and I'm so privileged to have a chance to work with him and many other colleagues at Google to try to spread the gospel about CLV. So what we want to do first is just to bring a little bit of clarity to what CLV is and isn't. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some actual case studies where we bring it to life. But I think it's important to set the stage, because there's a bunch of people who don't quite understand it, or in some cases they actually think the wrong things about it, and they don't fully appreciate the breadth of use cases that it can take on. So let's talk about lifetime value. You see a couple of points right over here. Too often I'll hear companies say, yeah, I know what my customers' CLVs have been for the past 2 years. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. No, that's not right. There is this explicit distinction between what we think you are going to be worth over some future horizon, hopefully a long horizon, versus what you have been worth historically. The historical profitability is important, and it's important to know, and it helps give us a lot of guidance about what the CLV will be, but it's not interchangeable. So we really want it to be explicitly a forward-looking concept. Another reason why CLV hasn't quite taken off is that companies, there are no standards for how companies account for costs and just all the other inputs into it. So I'm really trying to bring some discipline there and trying to actually have this conversation, not just with the marketing folks, but with the folks in accounting and finance, to really attribute costs to customers and campaigns appropriately. Some companies will take the entire overhead of a great big branding campaign and just spread that across all the customers, and they're coming up with numbers that don't reflect the future value of those customers. So we really want to bring some, like I said, standards, disciplines, apples to apples comparability, and just overall rigor to the way that we approach customer lifetime value. But why do we want to do that? Well, let's just talk generically about some of the use cases. And you can see a bunch of points over here. I bet that a lot of you are already familiar with many, if not all of them. So just A, want to refresh what you know, B, start to fill in the blanks on some ideas that you might not have thought about before, and C, suggest that this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm in the process of writing a new book that's going to be called something like the CLV Playbook. You know, here are the 50 fun things to do with it once you have those numbers. Here are 6 broad use cases. And I don't mean to say that in a negative way. These are legitimate use cases, and we'll actually talk about specific real-world examples of companies making these kinds of use cases later in the webinar. But just to suggest that CLV is much more comprehensive than you think it is, and that it can be applied to decisions that aren't only limited to marketing. So if you look at the bottom bullet point over here, the whole idea of customer-based corporate valuation. This is the hottest topic that I'm working on today, and I'm happy to say it's hotter than any other topic I've ever worked on. The idea that if we can calculate the current and future value of all of our current and future customers, add all that up, that's the value of the company. And we've been actually doing this with publicly traded companies and showing that we can actually come up with more accurate estimates of future revenues, comparing ourselves to Wall Street analysts and absolutely stomping them in our ability to project future revenues for groups of customers or the company as a whole. So I think it's really important to understand these kinds of use cases. I think it gives you that much more motivation. But what we want to do is now take a deeper dive to really start to understand what's going on over here. You'll see on this next slide that we use this title, Real Life Examples. These aren't the case studies yet. Those are coming up towards the end. But these are some of the things that you really need to know about, some patterns that we see in the data, some approaches that you need to take if you're going to start taking CLV seriously. So as a specific example, for those of you who are familiar with it, you've probably seen this formula on the right. This is your classic textbook CLV formula. I'm not going to walk you through it because, quite frankly, it's wrong. It's very stylized, it's very idealistic, but it's not very realistic. And I could pick apart almost any aspect, every aspect of this formula to tell you why it's wrong. I'm not going to take all the time because I want to be a little bit more constructive, but let me just give you one specific example. At the heart of this formula is this idea of R to the T, the retention rate, and that in theory, if we want to know how many customers are with us for 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 periods, we would take the retention rate and we would multiply it by itself that many times. That's what the textbook tell us, but that's not real life. So let's show you what real life looks like. Even though this next slide is a little bit stylized, we've made it look kind of smooth. This is what the world looks like. So if we are in some kind of contractual setting, so it's some kind of subscription program, or maybe it's some kind of it's a beer of the month club or something like that, any kind of contractual setting where attrition is observable, where customers have to raise their hand and close their account, as opposed to the relationship that they'll have with, say, a retailer or an airline or a pharmaceutical firm. This is what the patterns look like. The greenish line, the higher one, that's what it would look like if you just did the R to the T thing. That's the pattern you'd get. But in reality, you'll always see the more orange line, which is to say when you look at a group of customers and say how quickly are they dying off and how many of them are staying with you through a period of time, you'll see really two things. Number one, the drop-off is much more dramatic than you would expect it to be, but so is the leveling off. And what's most interesting about this curve is what you don't see, which is if we project forward beyond these 10 renewal cycles, we're going to see that orange curve is now nice and level, whereas the green one is still going to be working its way down slowly. And so the gap is going to reverse. The orange curve will be above the green curve, suggesting that if we don't use the right model, if we don't understand the right dropout pattern for our customer base, in the long run, we are going to greatly undervalue our customers and therefore underspend on acquisition, underspend on retention activities for the best customers. There are all kinds of dramatic effects that we really should be taking into account. But if we're not looking at the data the right way or doing the right math behind it, we're going to be missing out. So this is just one example. Again, it's stylized, but very, very realistic. Every single data set I've ever seen in a contractual setting tends to look like that. But there's a host of other reasons why the standard textbook method doesn't really get the job done for you. And again, without belaboring the negative aspects too much, I just want to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of the other points that companies sometimes don't necessarily account for as they step on in to do some kind of CLV analysis. So we can see on this next slide, there's just 4 quick bullet points with it. We've already covered the second one, the fact that the future trajectories, not only are they different than what textbook CLV would suggest, but they're also very standard and predictable, and there's no reason why you should be afraid of it just because it's a little bit different here. A couple of other points that you can see in front of you. Number one, it's vitally important when you're doing this kind of customer base analysis to do it at the cohort level. We really want to look at all the customers whom we acquired at a certain point in time or through a certain channel or as part of a certain campaign or who bought a particular product with us. It's very, very important. Even if you're going to celebrate the heterogeneity and not look at averages, it's really, really important to break it down cohort by cohort to see how long each one of those cohorts is going to last. It's going to be much easier to make the predictions and get the diagnostic understanding at the cohort level and to start to see differences across cohorts. So you can see, are the customers we're acquiring today substantially different than the ones that we acquired yesterday or the day before? The answer is usually they are, but it's really, really important to know that and to anticipate what the next batch of customers is going to look like. So as we go about doing our acquisition efforts, we have the right baseline to be able to project what they're going to be worth. Otherwise, we might be kind of disappointed. Third point here, I've emphasized this example of the contractual, but another one that's really, really important would be the non-contractual. So if you are in some kind of consumer discretionary setting where people are just buying things on their own, sometimes they're doing it in a kind of lumpy way, sometimes it's a long space between purchases, that's reality. most markets are not contractual. Most markets, people are just kind of buying almost as if randomly. And the patterns can be quite different, but still somewhat predictable in the non-contractual setting. So it's important to keep that distinction into account. And then the last distinction is whether transactions occur or the opportunities for transactions occur in a discrete manner. So let's say in a subscription setting, you pay your money, you have the service for a year, and then a year later you make the decision, do I stay with it or not? That would be a discrete example, whereas in many, many, many settings, most settings, it's continuous, which is to say you can make a purchase today, tomorrow, the day after, then you could take a snooze for a while. And so if you were to go back to that CLV formula, no need to do so, but if you saw it had a great big sigma in there, which implies discrete, which implies that we're doing the CLV calculations on a periodic by periodic basis. But keep in mind that the real world tends to be continuous. And so we need different models there, which the textbooks don't want to deal with because they're a little bit more complicated, but they're still not hard to do. The biggest point of all, though, is recognizing, not just recognizing, celebrating the differences across our customer base. The celebration of heterogeneity is what gives us great motivation to do CLV in the first place and to make higher profits as a result of it. So it's really important to understand how your customers differ from each other in terms of their future or even their current profitability. All of you took some horrible statistics course when you were younger, and the professor said, everything is a bell-shaped curve. Well, you know what? That's not true. When it comes to customer valuation, you're going to usually get this long skew distribution, kind of like you see on the right over here, the long tail of customers. And that's really, really, really important. This asymmetry, the fact that there are a small number of customers out there who are incredibly valuable, that gives you the motivation to want to figure out who are they? What makes them different than our other customers? What is it we can do to find more of them? And what can we do to really create and squeeze all of that value out of them? So it's important to recognize what the heterogeneity looks like. And as I said before, to look at the curve on the right across lots of different cohorts of customers to understand how they're different from each other and so on. So let's just kind of, without getting technical at all, take a shallow dive just to understand where CLV comes from. Because too often, it just seems like some kind of scary black box sort of thing. I don't want that to be the case at all. First of all, it is going to scare people away. But second of all, it doesn't let people fully appreciate how much they can use some of the underlying components. Sometimes the components are more interesting and more important than CLV itself. So as you see over here, CLV consists of four things. Let's start with the thing on the right, the historical value. We already mentioned that if we're going to get the overall CLV for a customer, it's going to be what they've done with us, and then more importantly and more interestingly, what they're going to do with us in the future. So we got the historical value, that's great, but we've cashed that check. Let's talk about what we can expect out of you in the future. And what we really project isn't just CLV in some magical, holistic way, but we project each of the three components that you see in parens over here. We ask three questions. How long is this relationship going to last? So whether it's a contractual case with observable churn or a non-contractual case with latent churn, how long are you going to even contemplate having that relationship with us? Number two, over that horizon, which might be unobservable, how many purchases will you make? So are you someone who's going to stay with us a long time but just purchase occasionally? Are you going to make a whole lot of purchases but move on quickly, or somewhere in between? So we want to understand that purchase propensity. And number three, when you buy, when a transaction takes place, how much are you going to spend? So if we look at how long the relationship lasts, how many purchases you're going to make over that horizon, and how large they're going to be, that's the future value. And we basically integrate all those things together. I mean, here we're just showing these multiplication signs. We don't really mean that literally in terms of how we do the math. It's a little bit more sophisticated than that. But we really do want to do justice to each of these three components. As I said a moment ago, sometimes the real value of CLV lies in these components as much as it does with the overall number that you get out of your black box and so on. So let's talk about what we do with these things. Like I said, I think that the strongest motivation to get people into CLV is to say, suppose we can wave our magic wand and we can see these numbers glowing over each customer's heads, then what would we do with it? And so in these next couple of slides, I'll give you some big picture examples, and then I'll hand it back to Michael to talk about some real rubber meets the road tactical applications of it, and then we'll get into our case studies.
Pete,
so just yep.
Sorry, not to interrupt, but there is actually an interesting question that I thought this would be the perfect time maybe to address it, since you were talking about calculating CLV. So what's the difference between real success and the first conversion?
Very interesting. So too often we'll see that conversion take place, and we say, this is great that we've brought a customer in. And indeed, that's good news, but how much good news is it? And if it's someone who's basically, if the nature of this person, based on the purchase they made or other signals that we might have about them, suggests that they resemble our really low value customers, then that's going to give us a lot less to celebrate than if the early indications are that they represent a really high value customer. So we really want to not just celebrate a conversion, we want to use it, that's really the beginning of the relationship. And so we want to get a sense of, was this a really impactful conversion or just kind of a one and done, which is all too common. So it's really important to recognize that conversion is just really the front end of the relationship, of the CLV calculation. And in many, many, many cases, just because we're able to convert someone doesn't mean that they're going to do anything else with us. And unfortunately, a lot of that is outside of our control. I mean, we could roll out the red carpet and try to do all kinds of things and make recommendations and do all kinds of social connections, and it's going to make no difference. Many, many customers are one and done. So conversion by itself isn't a bottom line metric, but it's the first step in this future looking one.
Excellent, thank you.
So let's just talk just a bit, still generically, but I think aspirationally about what we can do with all of those CLVs. First thing we're going to do, it sounds a lot like old school marketing. You know, any old school marketer will remember STP, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. I'm a big believer in STP, but I want to make sure we do the S the right way. So instead of segmenting on the basis of demographics or psychographics or even attitudes, I'd rather segment on the basis of what we think customers are going to be worth in the future. Again, if we can make these numbers really visible, then it's natural that we want to segment on that basis. And then, as you can see over here, it looks a lot like classic textbook STP, but the difference is that we're doing this more on the basis of who are the best customers and what can we do to create and squeeze value out of them, as opposed to a traditional STP analysis where we break people into buckets, usually on the basis of demographics, and we say, okay, which one of those buckets is best served for our product? So we're coming at it in a very different way, in a more customer-centric way, and that's going to lead to these policies over here about how we're going to really talk quite differently about the customers instead of the way that we talk about the products. And so on the next page, you'll see a few. Some of them are kind of obvious, and some of them are maybe surprising and insightful, the ways that we would manage different kinds of customers. So for instance, when we talk about the high value ones, showing them the love doesn't necessarily mean coming up to them all the time when they're in the store or when we're having a conversation with them. And can I get you a cup of coffee? Are you happy now? Can I do anything else for you? Oh, we have other fine products and services that you might want. Actually, that can annoy them. So if anything, it's just being super, super, super attentive, as you see towards the bottom on the left over here, that if they ever have the slightest hiccup, we're on it. And we let them know that we're going to make that the tippy top priority. So it's not necessarily trying to fatten up the high value customers. They're pretty good already. The fattening up applies more to the medium tier customers, the customers who, they have a relationship with us, but it's a bit more sporadic. And we haven't been able to engage them quite the right way. We want to turn those gold ones into the platinum ones. And we want to just find ways to get them spend a little bit more frequently and a little bit more each time. And so you can see just some kind of sensible but standard examples to create that added engagement. This is the place we want to start making the recommendations. This is why loyalty programs were invented, not for the, yes, we're going to reward the high-value customers for their patronage, but we're really using it to develop the more of the medium-tier customers. And at the low end, well, again, this goes against the grain of what a lot of people think. Too often we got to really, really, really focus on those low-value customers. We got to turn those detractors into promoters. We got to teach them to love us, because otherwise, I am failing as a marketing manager. Well, you know what? Don't take it personally. Many of your customers, most of your customers are going to be relatively low value. It's not your fault. They were just born that way. And it's really your job is to recognize, first of all, how many of them are there, what kinds of acquisition activities you can do to try to get a better yield of higher value customers. Next would be, what would be some things you can do to try to, in a cost-effective manner, create and gain as much value out of them, but without worrying so much about turning those ugly ducklings into beautiful swans. So that just gives you a very quick overview of some of the things that you'd want to do. But I want to make it a little bit more tactical over here. I really want to talk about ways that you and other companies can really use CLV. So before I turn it back over to Michael, just kind of a summary of just these the very quick CLV perspectives. Number one, you got to do it the right way. One of the things that really frustrates me are how many companies say, yeah, we're doing the CLV thing, and what they're doing is not only not CLV, it's far from it, and it doesn't reflect the patterns that we know and the practices that are now so well established. Never talk about average customers, but at the same time, as you can see here, one-to-one marketing, I think is for most companies is a bit of an overstatement. It's very expensive. It's very risky. The ROI on it just isn't there. We want to break customers into small groups that we can act on using different kinds of behavioral principles. Like, for instance, as an old school direct marketer, or at least fan of direct marketing, I recommend something like RFM, recency, frequency, monetary value. Let's put people in buckets on the basis of those kinds of behavioral characteristics and target them at that level instead of trying to get more granular than that. I've already mentioned about STP, that we are using traditional STP approaches, just with a very different way of doing the segmentation in the first place, and really focusing more on how we create the value for the customers instead of how do we sell the product. And a really important point that I haven't touched on, but is really must be emphasized, is that you got to walk before you can run. You can't just hang a banner on the wall and start doing all this stuff and claiming that you're using CLV and being customer-centric. You need to start small. You need to run experiments to figure out what the patterns are, who the right customers are, what's the right way to allocate your resources across them, and so on. So the interplay between A/B testing and CLV is a really delicious one. And as companies are now becoming really comfortable with the former A/B testing, they need just to kind of ramp up the latter, the CLV part, and then the world's going to be a good place. Let me hand things over to Michael to talk a little bit about how we bring some of this stuff into play in the AdWords world.
Excellent. Pete, before we shift gears a little bit and we talk about marketing, a couple of interesting questions came in that I thought might be a good time to touch on. One question was, why include historical value in the CLV calculation? Isn't that in the past?
It's a great point. That is true. That as we stand somewhere midstream of a customer's history, what we really should be focusing on is what I like to call RLV, residual lifetime value. So tell me how much gas is left in the tank. So technically, CLV is the whole thing. It's the historical profitability plus the remaining or the residual lifetime value. Unfortunately, we tend to use those words interchangeably, and I really appreciate the question. We really should have more discipline about CLV being both, but RLV, residual lifetime value, being the thing that we really want to focus on as we make decisions moving ahead.
Excellent. And one more question from Parker. Understanding that a customer's purchasing potentially only accounts for a fraction of their lifetime value, what is the best practice for incorporating non-transactional value into CLTV?
That's a great point. Yeah, indeed, there are so many aspects that can shed light on future value, either to complement the raw transactions or to help us get an earlier read on what the future trajectory is going to look like than if we looked at the transactions alone. Here's my take on it. As I just mentioned on the last slide, so many companies are either not doing CLV or they're doing it the wrong way. My view is first, walk before you can run. Before worrying about bringing in those different kinds of non-transactional activities, which is really interesting, but you don't want to let the interestingness get ahead of just having a good baseline CLV model. So first, let's take the transactional data alone, really understand what the patterns look like, project how long you're going to be with us, what you're going to do, what you're going to spend. Let's validate those models over, say, a 1 or 2 year horizon. Let's fine tune them. Let's get the transactional stuff down really well. And then we can start to bring in the non-transactional a couple of ways. Number one, we can use it as ways to profile the customers. So what makes the high-value customers different? Well, it very often could be related to some non-transactional activities that they're doing with us. Number two, of course, using the non-transactional activities as a way to start to shape the relationship. And third, it's on the list, but it's not necessarily at the top of the list, is starting to bring some of those metrics in to try to make earlier and better CLV forecasts. But what you'll find, if you're using the transactional data the right way, is that the models will work so well that you don't really need the non-transactional data to make better forecasts in most cases. Can't hurt to try, but it's usually not going to help that much. In fact, let me flip it around and say, if you're finding that your models are heavily reliant on the non-transactional data, then it's probably not a very good model. That's what my experience has shown. So it's really good to bring that stuff in, but walk before you can run.
Excellent, thank you. And we'll address other questions towards the end of the webinar. So let's talk a little bit about bringing this information, once you calculate it, into your actual digital marketing practices. So let's take a look at how digital analytics tends to look within the organization. So on our left, we have traditional cross-channel digital marketing. We have display ads, video advertisement on YouTube. We might have search, we might have email, we might have social. And those campaigns, as we run them, the goal is to bring people to our website or to our mobile property. And so generally, it would be tracked with a solution like Adobe Analytics, or for the purposes of this example, we would use Google Analytics. Often we will have a tag management system that we use to deploy other analytical systems such as GA and others, and very often we might have a BigQuery as a database system. But if you're, let's say, a retail or if an e-commerce website, when transactions take place online, they're not stored only in Google Analytics, they're actually stored very often in a backend system. So many organizations have some kind of data warehouse program, SQL. A few companies rely on spreadsheets, which obviously not something that we advise. CRM data, ERP data, or any other data. And so the question is, if most of our, let's say, lifetime value or customer lifetime value analysis would actually happen on the backend, so in our data warehouse or in our CRM system, then how do we actually use this information in our digital marketing? So how do we ensure the flow of this information throughout our digital ecosystem? So what we wanted to do is share with you an actual examples of how this can work. So as the first step, a visitor can come to the website, and on your website, they might complete a purchase, an e-commerce transaction. And then that information about that transaction is entered into your CRM. So your customer has some kind of ID inside the CRM, and then within that CRM, they will have that purchase, or they might have a series of different purchases. They might have a sequence of online and offline purchases. But then we can take this information from our CRM and actually send it back into Google Analytics. So many organizations often struggle with how do we calculate what digital marketing channels are actually driving our offline sales. Well, Offline sales can also be imported back into Google Analytics, so you can see what marketing channels are driving not just online transactions, but online and offline transactions. And also within Google Analytics, then you can bring data such as customer lifetime value from your CRM to be able to see what marketing campaigns are generating the most profitable customer segments. And here we can see an example from Google Analytics where using the technology features such as user ID, we can see on each individual basis page views of what people were looking on the website. We can see if as a result of their experience on the website, they placed a call. If they actually completed the phone order, we can track phone order revenue. And then if in our backend system, we can tie that user ID to all of their to all of their purchases, we can then during lifetime value modeling, the way Pete suggested, we can bring this data back into analytics. And so here we can see on in user level lifetime value data. And here is just another example where again we are showing information based on a user level, and then we can see generally offline data such as sales calls, direct mailers that are sent, or offline sales from your backend system, your customer lifetime value information in Google Analytics. So the question is, well, why do we actually need this information in Google Analytics? Well, one is it makes for wonderful segmentation analysis, where you can see what marketing channels or what is the first initial marketing campaign that ended up bringing customers that end up being most profitable. But besides just looking and doing the analysis as to what took place, the very interesting use case is then we can leverage this information in our AdWords campaigns. So inside Google Analytics, we can take a segment of our most profitable customers, and then we can turn that segment into an audience and share that audience within AdWords. And there's an example of how we're actually doing it within Google Analytics interface. And then as a result, what this allows you to do is target your segments based on the CLV information. So right within AdWords, you can start remarketing to audiences that have the highest CLV, or another wonderful feature within AdWords is similar audience, where based on attributes of your most profitable customer segments, you can create similar audiences and you can target people that have not yet visited your website, but have the same attributes as people who not just visited your website, but are your best profitable customers. So essentially, you can market to new people who are highly qualified to be your customers. So to summarize, targeting customers that you already know, or targeting customer segments that you already know, but also to Pete's point, if there are some customer segments that maybe are not worth pursuing, then you can simply take them out of the equation. You can put them on a negative remarketing list, exclude them from your marketing efforts, and make sure that you do not end up spending money on customers that are not worth for your business to pursue.
So we want to give you a couple of quick examples, and I would love to leave time for questions. So I'm going to fly through these two real quick. But, you know, we've been talking about just a lot of real but sort of generic stuff. So let's put names to it, both in terms of companies and people. One of the companies I have great admiration for is Dress Barn. They have just an incredible discipline about how they use CLV to drive all kinds of decisions. In fact, I'm going to do two examples with you, Dress Barn being one. And in both cases, it's where CLV helps us find success at the high end as well as at the low end. I think that's a recurring theme here, which is really important to appreciate. So you can read this for yourself, but basically, Dress Barn is just really, really good at using CLV over and over and over again. So it's not just once a year, let's calculate CLV and then try to clone those best customers. But every time they run any kind of campaign is let's see which kinds of customers are reacting to it, or what kinds of campaigns are helping us acquire the best kinds of customers. So let's use different kinds of campaigns to really understand where those best customers lurk, and then what we can do with them to basically boost their value and to get higher ROI on those campaigns. So this would just be a very typical but very realistic example of what a company like Dressbarn is doing just routinely, day to day, constantly looking at their customer level data through this lens of CLV. But at the same time, they're also finding success at the low end. So as you mentioned before, when we have those low value customers, let's find ways to keep a relationship with them if we can, but try to do it in a more cost-effective manner. So as you can see in the next slide over here, Dressbarn is really good about trying to figure out who they should be sending their catalogs to or not. Catalogs are very expensive. It's really a fantastic way to maintain value for the best customers. But for those folks who are just buying, once a year and only on a severe discount, you probably don't want to be sending catalogs to them. So through Zodiac, we actually help them identify who are those customers they could just leave alone. And basically, it's not terminating the relationship with those folks by any means, but it's maintaining it in a more cost-effective manner. And we'll kind of wrap up the Dressbarn example with just a quote from Sandy Michaels. Again, I give her a tremendous amount of credit for just being so focused on using CLV to drive lots of different kinds of decisions. I'm very glad to give her the shout out. Heck, I encourage you to reach out to her directly and ask her maybe less about the specific tactical things that she's doing with CLV, but more about just how they develop an organization and just a kind of a mindset and a culture around it. Second example is with a company called Wahoo Fitness. Love this example because this involves a tighter technology integration. So instead of just handing the CLVs to a company like a Dressbarn and saying, here you go, do smart things with it, in this case, it was much more automated. So in this case, it was all about a Facebook lookalike campaign. So we calculate the CLVs, we wave our magic wand, and then we basically go to Facebook and say, hey, Facebook, we got these high CLV customers over here. Help us find more like them. And Facebook has this awesome technology that lets you do that. And what was really great about this campaign, in fact, I have to admit, I was really, really surprised at it. In fact, we could show you the numbers on the next slide over here. And this is actually a conservative number, getting when we say a 3x return on advertised spend, it's actually considerably above that. They're just trying to be conservative about it. But what's really, really great about this is that the win that we were able to achieve with Wahoo and with other companies is at both ends. That not only are we finding customers who will stay longer, buy more, spend more, and just overall have higher CLV, but because we're being agnostic about who these customers are. Usually when people go to Facebook for acquisition purposes, they're saying, find me people who like to ride bikes and who like gadgets and who like the outdoors. Find me people with those kinds of demographic or psychographic or lifestyle characteristics. That's not what we're doing. We're saying, hey, Facebook, just find us people like these. And we're just pointing to the high-value customers regardless of anything about them. And so what does that lead to? Cheaper customer acquisition. So instead of chasing after the same customers that all of their competitors are chasing after who fit some stereotypical characteristics, let's go after the customers who are just most valuable, regardless of the reasons why. And so it's great to find customers who end up having greater endurance and greater spend, but acquiring them for actually cheaper than you're getting for your typical customers. Now, I'm not saying you can do that forever. At some point, you're going to overfish those waters. But at least for every company, there is this kind of low-hanging fruit of good customers who can be acquired relatively cheaply and will stay with you a long time. But it all involves getting past your stereotypes and using the data to drive those kinds of decisions. Back to you, Michael.
Excellent. And one case study that we wanted to showcase is our work with Pelican Water Systems, and Google actually published a case study because the challenge that Pelican had as an omnichannel reseller is how do we actually understand customer experience as people buy online, people buy through call center, people buy through other offline mediums, and they had a very hard time being able to target or retarget the people that ended up purchasing offline and being able to tie their online and offline journey together. And using the similar methodology that we've outlined in the past few slides, we were able to optimize their marketing efforts, targeting the most profitable customer segments that ended up coming to the website via online marketing and placing orders via call center, and then continuously placing recurrent orders via offline mediums. And they discovered that the ROI of their paid advertising campaigns was actually 130% higher than they previously thought, and they can attribute 15% of all of their offline sales to specific marketing campaigns. And here you can see a quote from Robert that talks about the power of this and what visibility into this information has allowed them to do. So now let's take a few questions. Before we dive into questions, I wanted to showcase that we're going to have a next webinar on June 15th. We'll have CLV office hours. As I can see, there are many questions that are coming our way. So many of them we'll try to answer right now, and then some we will answer in the next webinar that is really meant as office hours. And so with that, Pete, the question for you: how do you ensure that massive volumes of consumer data don't force your brand in a challenging marketing direction? For instance, baby boomers could vote up a brand direction with dollars, which could jeopardize relationship with young customers who may be detractors.
It's an interesting question. I'm glad you brought it up. You know, when we think about baby boomers and millennials and all this kind of thing, I am not a fan of any of that. I think that when we kind of paint our customers with such broad strokes and using stereotypes that frankly aren't supported very well by data, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. So as I mentioned in that Wahoo example, sometimes we'll find that what constitutes our best customers doesn't necessarily fit to our stereotypical profile of who those customers are. I think what we really need to do is to lead with the data and say who are the best customers, and then back out what kinds of characteristics make them different than other kinds of customers. And I hate to say it, no, actually I'm happy to say it, that it's pretty rare that generational aspects will pop as a factor that effectively distinguishes the best customers from the not so good ones. So start with the data and then bring in those characteristics later.
Any examples of Facebook sharing lookalike attribute data to help predict a new customer's CLV, whether or not they were acquired via Facebook?
I don't know the answer to that, but all I can say is what Facebook has been doing with its lookalike technology and some of the related value adds that they're providing has been, I mean, honestly, the single most impressive thing that I've ever seen out of that company. I'm not even a big user of Facebook myself, but I just see the effectiveness of those lookalike campaigns, and we've done a number of them by now with Zodiac, and it's incredible. So I don't know what the secret sauce is. I do believe that the Googles of the world and others are have a lot of respect and fear for what Facebook is doing there. So it works. I wish I knew more, but I don't.
Question, or I guess a comment from Sanin about using Mixpanel versus Google Analytics. So Sanin, we're actually not advocating to leverage lifetime value that is available right within Google Analytics. What we are merely suggesting is bringing CLV from your backend system, right? So when you go through the CLV analysis, using models that Pete recommended, then you can put this information back into Google Analytics and then share that information with AdWords or with DoubleClick. Mixpanel is certainly a good solution, but the use case is slightly different. I hope this answers your question or provides some clarity around your comment.
And in fact, if I can just add to that, Michael,
Sure.
I think it's really important for companies to kind of own their own CLV capabilities rather than just trusting a black box. I mean, in no way to disparage Google or any other firm that's out there doing that. But I think the more that you can look at the data and understand the sources of that value and how your customers are differentiated on it, the more that you'll find just good tactical use of it. So, own the CLV, validate it instead of just viewing it, instead of having someone else just doing it for you.
Question from Kyle. Considering ROV a forward-aligned measurement built from the inside of the company, wouldn't this framework paradoxically generate room for low-end or new market disruption to iterate?
I like to believe so. I've seen some great results with companies making good use of and good for you for saying RLV. I think there are disruptive capabilities here in a couple of levels. Number one, the idea of truly building a business in a customer-centric manner instead of, who do we sell the product to? It's we got these valuable customers. What can we do to find more like them and extract that value from them? That's pretty disruptive. And then number two, in terms of the financial metrics that we're calculating and that we're reporting either internally and externally, this idea of customer-based corporate valuation, we can see the true value of our company in a very different way. And have a better way of understanding how different kinds of tactical and strategic things that we're doing to get a more genuine ROI on them. So I'm obviously biased, but I really do believe that regular and rigorous use of these approaches and just the overall mindset around them can have dramatic impact for a company and a market.
A question from Brent. How does Dresbar know what customers really read, if customers, I guess, really read the catalog and how effective the catalog is? I guess the question is around how do you actually track when you send the catalog if that specific one caused the conversion or generated revenue?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I think Dresbar would, and I probably should know the answer from many conversations with them. But actually, in the catalog example, it was actually much simpler than that. It wasn't about in which cases did the catalog generate purchases or not. It was just simply for the really low-value customers, let's not take on the expense of sending them catalogs. So we have no idea if the higher-value customers are actually using it or not. And in fact, I've seen examples with other companies. I won't name names, but other companies that find that whether orders are coming through the catalog or not, the high value customers just like having it. It just creates a kind of engagement, whether it's generating orders. So in this case, it was just a way to trim some excess costs, and it was really nothing about attributing value to the catalog itself.
A question from Parker. How does one predict in advance what CLV segment a customer should be placed in? Example of attributes which are predictive.
I wish there were universal answers to that, Parker. I think it's a great question. At this point in our kind of scientific maturity, we know what the CLV patterns look like. I mean, I showed you that one curve, and I could bore you to death with a zillion others. We know what the curves look like. We're starting to get an understanding of how different cohorts start to vary from each other and so on. And while we can then tie the goodness of customers back to observable characteristics, and we'll often see results there, I can't say that I've seen enough to make any systematic claims that certain kinds of customers are just generically better than others. I mean, some of them would be pretty obvious. Maybe customers with higher income will have higher CLV. Okay, well, that's not very insightful. But in fact, even there, it might not be as strong as you think. So we're just now trying to do enough CLV analyses across a wide variety of customer segments and companies. And then over the next few years, we'll start to see that kind of meta-analysis across these standalone analyses to really start to see what pops systematically. But I'd be lying if I said we're anywhere close to that right now.
There are two more questions. One is data quality. How do you feel data quality impacts a company's ability to calculate lifetime value?
Garbage in, garbage out. It's critically important. And one of my concerns is that despite what companies claim to be investing in data quality, I don't think it's enough. And if you put on the CLV glasses and you're really going to be running the business that way, then you'll realize that the ROI on data quality efforts and just overall good data stewardship is really, really important. A lot of companies see it just as an operational thing. It's sort of like clean bathrooms. We just got to make sure that our data are clean enough. They don't necessarily see it as a strategic investment that's actually going to produce ROI. But once you start thinking about CLV, then you really start to realize that it's worth investing in data quality and not just meeting minimal standards.
Perfect. And last question from Ravindra. Is there any perfect tool to calculate CLV? I would suggest checking out Zodiac metrics. Pete, anything to add to that question?
I appreciate the shout out there. Well, let me just say quickly, as I said before, that there are basically two broad classes of businesses, contractual and non-contractual. So it's very different in one versus the other because you have observed versus unobserved customer attrition. But within each of those settings, there is a fairly standard model. This is what I've been doing for the past 15 years. You can go to my website and see a zillion papers on it, or you can go to Zodiac Metrics and see some descriptions of those models, as well as some nice case studies of bringing them to life.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I believe these are most of the questions. I know that we are way over time, and I'm excited to see that many of you have stayed with us past the hour. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. As we mentioned before, a copy of the slide deck will be sent out to all the attendees. You can come see Pete at the conference, and there's a link to the conference, and we hope that everyone will be able to make our next webinar, CLV Office Hours, where we will dive into many of these questions, and we will get a chance to pick Pete's brain about how to best calculate and use CLV. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, Michael.